Hey guys, I'm James and welcome to my journal. And today we are doing, I guess, part 2 of the Psycho story, Psycho Superhero Squad. I once again forgot to put the title in. A twisted twist of fate. There we go. Okay, so I won't go through all it's not even open on the other page. Okay then. I won't go through all the mind maps and everything because not much has really changed. It's literally just like the place name. So we have if you missed the last episode or whatever, we have a group of psychos, same ones as with the Eiffel Tower scenario. So it's Richard Long, Go and Getter, and Lord Brain. And yeah, they go on another adventure. This time we're diving into Richard's past and how he kind of became who he is. But it starts in the present, then goes back. And a little less snivelly today actually, which is good. So yeah, I hope you enjoy. And without further ado, let's get into the reading. Richard Long, Go and Getter, and Lord Brain sat on the couch. They joked and laughed like any normal group of people would. Richard only got the drive when it came to criminals. Go and Getter had two personalities that he switched between frequently, and Lord Brain, well, Lord Brain was just quite a nice guy. They all sat and chatted as normal as could be. The casual observer would see nothing strange about the people sitting on the couch sipping coffee. Instead, such an observer's eye would be drawn to their surroundings, and the apartment wasn't paid for, and was about as run down as an apartment could be. So much so that Lord Brain had mistaken a part of the ceiling as a sugar cube. The reason being, said piece of ceiling was located in his coffee cup. The plop sound it had made had been overridden by laughter and therefore wasn't registered. The walls fared better than the ceiling, the reason being, part of the ceiling had been duct-taped into place, filling in the holes in the wall. When asked what he was doing, Lord Brain had replied, "I'm sealing up the holes in the wall," insisting that it was called a ceiling for that very reason. The holes in the roof were put to good use. It served as the trio's shower, mouldy wallpaper being used as a sort of shower curtain. Of course, the shower only worked when it rained, but that bothered none of them overly much. Why? Because they had discovered a technique to get it to work when they wished. They would complain about the weather when they wanted a shower, because everyone knows when you complain about the weather it's only bound to get worse. The holes in the floorboards served as their storage system, the many shelves in the apartment after rotting beyond usability long ago. As they talked, it began to rain. Nobody was in the mood for a shower. They'd all had one in the morning. So they decided it was time to go look for some fun, preferably some crime. On the cover of night and darkened sky, one shall find crime, Richard said, quoting himself as he tended to do. Indeed, Go and Getter said, letting his psychotic side slip between the cracks of his other personality. He was ready for a fight. He wanted some adventure. Let's go to the casino, Lord Brain suggested. It had been great fun last time. They had won every bet they made due to Lord Brain's present for Richard. It was a pair of loaded die that always rolled snake eyes. Richard had loved them so much he hadn't parted from them since he got them, going on 4 weeks ago. Richard smiled. Yes, let's. But I don't wanna. Casinos are boring, Go and Getter whined. Gowan, Richard said sternly. Go and Getter slipped from psychotic to standard instantly. Go and Getter hated his psychotic side. It drove what Richard believed to be the real Go and Getter mad. Him and Lord Brain both knew it, and they each did their best to help. Lord Brain, just because that's what he liked to do. Richard, because he cared. There were only 5 things in the world that Richard cared about. His collection, his revenge, the 2 men sitting either side of him, and himself. Richard wasn't sure when he'd started to care. One day it just happened. Lord Brain because he was useful, that much made sense. But why he cared about Go and Getter so much? had always confused him. Richard stood, signaling to the others it was time to go. The others stood simultaneously, and together they all picked up their respective coats, put their arms in the sleeves, right first, then left, before fixing each of their favourite aspects of clothing. Lord Brain his tie, Go and Getter his shirt cuffs, and Richard the lapels on his creamy brown coat that Go and Getter had bought him for his birthday. It made him look like Sherlock Holmes, a sociopath they all admired. With clothing all in order, they pulled the door off its hinges and exited the apartment, heading down the concrete stairs to the cobbled street below, where they were instantly assaulted by a barrage of watery missiles that the general population liked to call rain. Instantly all thoughts of looks were disregarded as coats were ruffled or removed and used as wind and rain shields. Eventually they stumbled through the door to the casino. Soaked to the skin and panting, they drew little attention as they wiped their feet on a doormat with an imprint of the Eiffel Tower on it. They headed straight for the section of the casino cordoned off for dice-based games. Richard greeted a table full of drunken gamblers. Most of them he knew. The great thing about playing with drunks was that they were so slow in the head they didn't notice how the dice always rolled in his favour. They were also so drunk that they weren't likely to remember the last time they played him, so you could pull all the same tricks on them again. "Hello, gentlemen," Richard said, pulling out the spare chair and sitting down. Instantly, Richard put forward a ridiculous sum of money as his bid, taking out his special dice with a subtle flick of the hand. "Go on then, Richie. Roll," Jordan said groggily. He did so happily, and ended up winning as he always did. Go and Getter was already bored. He wandered off looking for a game that would suit him. As usual, he found no such thing in the casino. He sat at the small bar inhaling the musky air. He smelled cigarette smoke, stale whiskey, varnish and hormones, testosterone and estrogen in equal amounts. He looked around at the people in the room, old men, young women, and mutant rabbits carrying serving trays covered in cocktails made up the population. There was one particular character that drew his attention, however. A young man stood in shadow leaning against a wall. There was something about him that seemed off. He seemed to have an aura that called to him in a strange way. The man stepped into the light of one of those long tubes of light bulbs, the kind that seemed to be designed to flicker. As the man collected his winnings, a tattoo on his wrist became visible. It depicted a skull smoking. It was Robin. Go and Get a dash to Richard. "Robin's here. Robin's here. Robin's here." Instantly Richard ceased smiling. Robin was one of the few things he cared about. He slotted him in under the heading of revenge. Richard casually collected his winnings, stood, and followed Go and Getter to the bar. Go and Getter pointed. Richard stopped and stared. To put it more accurately, he stopped and glared in a passive way. "As soon as he leaves, we jump him," Richard declared. "For now, let's order drinks and wait for him to come over." "You think he will?" "Definitely." The barkeeper looked at them, raising his eyebrows expectantly as he casually cleaned a glass with a rag. Richard pointed to the drink a man beside him was having and put up 2 fingers. The barkeeper nodded and set about his task. Enjoy the peace while it lasts, Richard thought. He knew it wouldn't last long. It was at times like these that Richard wished he had eyes in the back of his head, just so that he could glare at people such as Robin a little longer. To make up for the lack of such sensory organs, he settled on thumbing Lord Brain's dice, making sure that the snake eyes faced Robin for as long as possible. Suddenly he heard light and heavy footsteps behind him. Light because said footsteps were near silent, heavy because said footsteps had such emotional weight. Hatred lay heavy upon Richard's heart as the owner of those cursed footsteps slapped him on the shoulder and said, "Hey there, Big Willie." It was Robin's nickname for him, and Richard hated it. "Fuck off, Rob-Knob," he said gently, but with plenty of venom. Robin said. It was definitely said, as there was no happiness behind that laugh, just mockery and an underlying sentiment of mutual hate. A brief flicker. Richard began breathing heavily. He met Robin's gaze and managed to calm himself, however he still twitched a bit. He looked at Robin's eyes. One real and oh so enticing, the other fake, made of glass. a staring contest? Robin asked. I bet you'll win, he said, convulsing slightly until his glass eye was nearly popping out of his head, the other eye firmly shut. How could they have let him free? After all he's done to others. Richard's thoughts paused slightly. After all he's done to me. It was then that a torrent of memories came back unbidden. Richard stopped them in their tracks, thinking of everything other than them, as he stared transfixed at the face of Robin! His mind screamed, as he stared transfixed at the face of Robin. You're doing well so far, Robin said wistfully. Now, if you don't mind, I'm rather thirsty right now, so... He continued, pulling a capri-sun out of his pocket, tearing the straw from the side and slowly peeling the plastic off, before punching a hole through the top of the flimsy plastic container in one violent motion, anger clearly registering on his face. He began to slurp and gurgle as he sucked up the contents. Slowly but surely Robin continued to sip, slurping merrily as he stared at Richard intently. Robin squeezed the bag-like container to make sure he extracted every last drop of the liquid inside before his lips parted from the straw and he went, It was then that all the memories came rushing back, a steady flow of pain. Richard remembered the basement. How could he forget? After all, he'd spent most of his childhood there. It was a cold, dark room with soundproof cladding all around. There were no shelves, no lights, no toys, no fresh air, no food, no water, just silence. A never-ending silence. His father kept him there. Richard was 4 when his mother left. He didn't remember much of her. But since he had nothing nice to remember since the day she left, he remembered her having dark black hair, and perhaps he was mixing up her hair with the basement. One thing he was sure of, however, was her beautiful eyes. They were eyes one doesn't easily forget. A deep dark blue, with specks of golden green dotted around sparsely, like small tropical islands in a great sea. Richard remembered that all right, but he remembered much, much more. He remembered a flicker of light that he had used to shield his eyes from, and dashed towards desperately. It came every couple of days, or at least it felt that way. The light entered through a small hole in the door, also soundproofed, of course. Through the slit he would see his father sitting down with his back against the door. The hole was on the bottom half of the door, so when he looked out he was at about eye level with his father. Tense moments of silence would pass between them. It was silence, yes, but nothing compared to the silence of the basement. During this silence, at least he could hear the faint ticking of a clock, the sound of an almost imperceptible breeze, the subtle scrape of years-old dust as it accompanied that almost imperceptible breeze that found purchase on his face before being gently tugged into the basement by some natural force unbeknownst to him. Richard savoured that moment. The silence accompanied by another slow heartbeat, another set of lungs recycling stale air. Too soon it was over. It was always Richard who ended that silence he so enjoyed. It is only human nature, after all, to try for more. A hoarse, croaking voice would sound out words he barely knew the meaning of. The voice came from Richard's mouth, although he hated to admit it. It said, "Help, please, let me out of here." To which a much deeper, better tuned voice would reply, "If you ask enough times, then maybe, but for now, no. Please, please, please," he would croak. Richard knew it would do him no good, but a sort of vain hope lingered, driving him on, a mad, sickening hope that turned into a sort of song. Please, please, please. It would be then that his father would open up the flower in his pants and pull out his cock. This was a good sign. It meant that his father would stay a while and talk, mumble about things. It was contact, a horrid contact, but it was better than no contact at all. His father would sit there and play, whilst Richard would moan the word "please" over and over again. Then, suddenly, in one swift movement, his father would moan to him, like, Richard's brain had done the best to forget that part. But the game was this. If his father hit him in the face, he would be told, "That'll have to suffice till next time." If he managed to dodge, he would be handed food and drink that he would instantly guzzle down. The food was always porridge. The drink was always a capri-sun. The day Richard most vividly remembered from this horrid time was when he had been hit square in the face and his father had said to him, "Oh, Big Willie, how you mean with Richard Long?" Richard Long had once been a fat child named William. Not that he knew it. He'd only been 4 when he had been put in that basement. He knew words, but still got the meaning of sentences wrong. From then on, he thought his name was Richard Long. One day, his father had been sloppy and had the keys to the basement poking out of his pocket. It was a big mistake. Richard must have scoured that basement floor 1,000 times. It was only on this day that he found something that felt sharp, rusted and metallic. The hole in the door was small, too small for a normal person's hand, but Richard was a child. His hands were small, and he hadn't eaten his porridge for 3 visits in a row. He was desperate, dying, but most importantly, one away to nothing but skin and bone. The hole in the door opened. In one rapid movement, the hand with the shiv flashed out of the hole in the door, tearing off Richard's skin as it went. Before he had been skin and bone, now he was bone and sinew. It was just about enough to guide his arm. He went for his father's face, blade first, and embedded the blade deep into the socket of his eye. With great effort, Richard twisted the blade inside and managed to pop out the eye, leaving only a dangling line of flesh. Whilst his father was distracted, clutching at his face, desperately trying to quell the flow of blood, Richard fumbled for his father's keys. His middle finger found purchase, looping through the hole in the keychain. To do so, Richard had to reach out even further. There was now nothing but stringy sinew and visible bone from his wrist to his elbow. Richard let out a deafening scream as he twisted the shredded arm to lift the keys up to the surface of the door. Richard gritted his teeth as he blindly fumbled for a keyhole. He found one. There were 3 keys on the keychain. He picked one at random and forced it into the hole. He'd picked the right one. With another deafening scream, Richard managed to make his limbs twist the key in the keyhole, and with a subtle click, he was free. Richard blinked once in disbelief, before quickly ripping his arm free of the door. More flesh was removed as he did so, but he didn't care, not really. He was free. Some say that insanity is about doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. When Richard had began, he knew it wouldn't help him. Had begged, rather. He knew it wouldn't help him. He didn't expect things to change. He'd only hoped it would. No. That wasn't a proper definition of insanity. A far better way to describe going insane would be, it's when the sobbing turns into laughter. Because when Richard looked at his father and the missing eye on the floor, he hadn't cried like perhaps he should. Rather, he'd picked up the eye and laughed. He never knew his father's name, nor did he care. The man now writhing on the ground before him had taken his life away, so Richard had decided to call him Robin. Okay, guys, so yeah, it's a once again a kind of semi-comic horror, but I focused a bit more on the horror aspect of it. And what I was basically trying to do is, last time I had put across Richard and Go and Getter as very cruel characters, and Lord Brain is bad but with something to him. Everyone has something to him, I think. And to round off the character, I got caring on the thing, so I thought, okay, let's make Richard a caring person who's been twisted by some experience in his past. And I wrote about the experience in his past, and I was talking through it about towards the start, around, it was even on page 1, about how he cared about his collection, his revenge, the 2 men sitting either side of him, and himself. He wasn't quite sure why he cares for Go and Getter, but he does, and that's kind of the thing that he's been through a lot, and he also cares about the people around him, and that kind of is his characteristic that makes you kind of like him, even though he's clearly a cruel character, you can't help but like him a little bit or feel some sort of sympathy for him. That's kind of what I wanted to put across. And maybe we'll do something for Go and Get Her or whatever, or maybe we'll just leave it like that. But for now, the next one of these videos is it's not going to be a horror one. I'm going to do something a bit lighter because yeah, I was writing this, and the last bit at the bottom, it's pretty twisted the way it is. I originally wrote it more so, and had to tone it down a bit because it was like in my head it was like, well, I need something pretty bad to, you know, make Richard turn into such a bad person if he was originally caring. So in my head I was like, yeah, I think that's just about enough. But then when I actually wrote it, it was like, oh god, that's a bit much. So I toned it down to what it is now, which is still pretty shocking actually. But yeah, so if you did enjoy, please do like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Yeah, I enjoyed this one. I did, because it was definitely out my comfort zone. It's not fantasy. It's definitely like more horror. So yeah. Anyway, as I say, thank you for listening, and bye.